Blood pooled at the corner of Eleanor Bennett's split lip as she stumbled into the livery stable, her sanctuary from the rage that had followed her home from the saloon. Moonlight filtered through the wooden slats of the old structure, casting long shadows across the dirt floor as she collapsed against a stack of hay bales, her body shaking with each sob. The year was 1875, and Agua Caliente, Arizona Territory, was no place for a woman alone, something Eleanor had learned the hard way after her father's passing 6 months prior. Lucas Northrop tightened the cinch on his saddle when he heard its soft crying coming from the back of the livery. He'd just returned from a 3-week cattle drive and had planned to stable his horse for the night before finding a hot meal and a soft bed at the boarding house. Instead, he found himself moving cautiously toward the sound, his spurs jangling softly with each step. "Hello." He called out, his voice low and gentle. "Someone there." The crying stopped abruptly. Lucas rounded the corner of a stall and froze. A young woman with auburn hair sat huddled against the hay, her face turned away. Even in the dim light, he could see the dark bruising along her jawline and the torn sleeve of her dress. "Madam," he said, removing his hat and keeping his distance. "Are you all right?" Eleanor flinched, her green eyes wide with fear as she turned to face him. "Please, just leave me be." Lucas had seen that look before in wounded animals, in men who'd been beaten down too many times. He'd worn that look himself once, long ago. He crouched down, staying a respectful distance away. "I'm not gonna hurt you. Name's Lucas Northrop. I work at the Carson Ranch just outside town." He kept his voice steady, the way he would with a spooked horse. "Can I help you?" Eleanor attempted to wipe away her tears, wincing as her fingers brushed against tender skin. "No one can help me. Who did this to you?" Lucas asked, his jaw tightening as he took in the extent of her injuries in the moonlight, the bruised cheek, split lip, and what looked like finger marks on her arm. "It doesn't matter," she whispered. "It matters to me," Lucas replied, surprising himself with the fierce certainty in his voice. Eleanor studied him, this tall cowboy with kind eyes and work-worn hands. He seemed different from the men who frequented her father's old general store, now managed by her husband of 8 months, Thomas Whitaker, the man who had promised to care for her after her father's death. The man whose drunken rage had sent her fleeing into the night. "My husband," she finally admitted, her voice barely audible. He gets angry when he drinks." Lucas felt a cold fury building inside him. "This isn't the first time, is it?" Eleanor looked away, answer enough. Lucas stood slowly, settling his hat back on his head with a determination that made Eleanor's heart quicken. "This ends tonight," he said, his voice quiet but laced with steel. "No man has the right to treat a woman this way." "You don't understand," Eleanor protested, a tremor in her voice. "Thomas owns the store. He has friends on the town council. If I leave him, you won't be alone," Lucas cut in. He offered his hand to help her up. "What's your name, madam?" "Eleanor Whitaker. Eleanor Bennett, before I married." "Well, Miss Eleanor," Lucas said, "I make you this promise. He won't hurt you again." Eleanor hesitated, then placed her hand in his. At 22, she had already resigned herself to a life of fear and pain. Looking up at Lucas Northrop, she wondered if perhaps there might be another path. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "First, get you somewhere safe," Lucas replied, helping her to her feet. "My boss's wife, Sarah Carson, is a good woman. She'll take you in tonight, then I'm going to have a conversation with your husband." "He'll kill you," Eleanor whispered. "When he's drinking, he's not himself." Lucas's mouth set in a grim line. "I've handled men like him before. Now come on, my horse is out front." Eleanor hesitated, years of obedience and fear warring with the desperate need to escape. What if Thomas found her? What if this stranger was no better? But the gentleness in Lucas's eyes gave her courage. "All right," she finally said. Lucas helped her onto his horse, a sturdy chestnut gelding named Copper, and led them out of town by moonlight. Eleanor clung to the saddle horn, her body aching from Thomas's latest outburst. She had married him believing his promises of security and comfort after her father's death left her with debts and a failing business. The first few months had been peaceful enough, but then the drinking started, followed by the accusations, the jealousy, and finally, the beatings. "Been working for the Carsons about 3 years now," Lucas said as they rode, trying to put her at ease. Mr. Carson's fair and Mrs. Carson treats the ranch hands like family. You'll be safe there." "Why are you helping me?" Eleanor asked, her voice small against the night sounds. "You don't know me." Lucas was quiet for a moment. "My ma suffered at my pa's hands for years before she found the courage to leave. By then, her spirit was nearly broken. No one helped her when they should have. I promised myself I'd never stand by if I saw someone else in that position." Eleanor felt tears welling again. "I'm sorry about your mother." "She found peace eventually," Lucas said. "Got us away to her sister's place in Colorado, worked as a seamstress until she passed 5 years back." He paused. "How long have you been married?" 8 months, Eleanor replied. "My father died last year. The store was failing. Thomas offered to take over the business and take care of me." She gave a bitter laugh. "I was naive enough to believe him." They rode in silence for a while, the moon lighting their path across the desert. Eleanor found herself studying Lucas's profile, the strong jaw covered in stubble, the straight nose, the way his brown hair curled slightly at his collar. He couldn't be much older than her, perhaps 25 or 26, but there was a steadiness to him that felt much older. The Carson Ranch appeared on the horizon, a sprawling single-story adobe house with several outbuildings and corrals. A lamp still burned in one window despite the late hour. Lucas helped Eleanor down from the horse, his hands strong but gentle on her waist. "Wait here," he said, tying Copper to a hitching post. "Let me speak to Mrs. Carson first." Eleanor nodded, suddenly nervous. What would these people think of her? Would they judge her, send her away? She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering in the cool night air. Lucas returned minutes later with a plump, gray-haired woman in a dressing gown, her kind face creased with concern. "Oh, you poor dear," Sarah Carson said, immediately taking Eleanor's cold hands in her warm ones. "Come inside this instant. We'll get you cleaned up and fed, Mrs. Carson. This is Eleanor Whitaker," Lucas said. "Eleanor, this is Sarah Carson. Please call me Sarah," the older woman insisted, leading Eleanor toward the house. "Any friend of Lucas is welcome here." "Thank you," Eleanor whispered, overwhelmed by the unexpected kindness. "Lucas, you'll find some hot coffee in the kitchen," Sarah called over her shoulder. "Help yourself while I get this young lady settled." Lucas tipped his hat. "Yes, madam, I'll be heading back to town after." Eleanor turned, alarm flashing across her face. "Lucas, please don't you worry about that now," Sarah interrupted gently. "Lucas knows what he's doing. Let's get you taken care of first." Lucas watched them disappear into the house, his resolve hardening. He had recognized the name Whitaker. Immediately, Thomas Whitaker had a reputation in Agua Caliente. He owned the general store, but spent more time in the saloon than behind his counter. Lucas had heard whispers about his temper, but had never interfered. It wasn't his business. Now, seeing Eleanor's bruised face, he knew he couldn't stand by any longer. He mounted Copper and rode back toward town, planning his approach. A direct confrontation with a drunk, violent man could end badly for both of them. Lucas wasn't looking for a fight, just justice. Perhaps Sheriff Davis could help, though the lawman was known to look the other way when it came to domestic matters. The lights of Agua Caliente came into view, the saloon still bright and noisy despite the late hour. Lucas tied Copper outside the sheriff's office and found Davis inside, boots propped on his desk as he cleaned his revolver. "Evening, Northrop," Davis said without looking up. "Bit late for a social call." "Not social, Sheriff. I'm here about Thomas Whitaker." Davis sighed, setting down his gun. "What's he done now? Another tab he ain't paid. He's been beating his wife," Lucas said bluntly. "I found her in the livery stable, bruised and crying, took her out to the Carson place for safety." Sheriff Davis's expression hardened. "That's a serious accusation, son. And intervening between a man and his wife is complicated business." "Beating a woman isn't complicated," Lucas countered, struggling to keep his tone respectful. "It's wrong, plain and simple." "I don't disagree," Davis said, standing up. "But the law gives a man certain rights in his own home. The law is supposed to protect people," Lucas interrupted, his patience wearing thin. "She's terrified, Sheriff. This isn't the first time, and you know as well as I do it won't be the last unless someone stops it." Davis studied Lucas for a long moment. "You sweet on this woman, Northrop?" "I just met her tonight," Lucas replied honestly. But I know what it's like to watch someone suffer and feel helpless to stop it. I'm not standing by this time, the sheriff sighed, reaching for his hat. All right. Let's go talk to Whitaker, but I'm handling this officially, understand? You're just there as a witness. Lucas nodded, relieved. Yes, sir. They found Thomas Whitaker at the Silver Dollar Saloon, deep in a poker game, a half-empty whiskey bottle at his elbow. He was a stocky man with thinning hair and a perpetual flush to his face, made worse by the alcohol. He looked up with bleary eyes as the sheriff approached. Thomas Whitaker, Sheriff Davis said formally, I need to speak with you outside. Whitaker scowled. I'm in the middle of a game, Davis. Can't it wait? No, sir, it cannot. The sheriff's tone left no room for argument. Grumbling, Whitaker gathered his money and followed them onto the boardwalk. When he spotted Lucas, his eyes narrowed suspiciously. What's this about? He demanded. Your wife, Sheriff Davis replied. Mr. Northrop here found her in a distressing condition tonight. Says you're responsible. Whitaker's face darkened. My wife is my business, Sheriff. If she's been spreading lies, I saw the bruises myself, Lucas cut in, unable to contain his anger. That split lip, the marks on her arms. No lies needed. You stay out of this, Cowboy, Whitaker snarled, taking a step toward Lucas. What I do with my wife isn't your concern. Sheriff Davis stepped between them. Actually, Thomas, it becomes my concern when it crosses into assault. Now your wife is safe at the Carson Ranch tonight. I suggest you go home, sober up, and we'll sort this out in the morning. She's my wife, Whitaker shouted, his face contorting with rage. She has no right to leave. I want to know which one of you interfered in my marriage. He jabbed a finger at Lucas. Was it you? You think you can steal another man's wife? Lucas felt his hands curling into fists but forced himself to remain calm. No one's stealing anything, Whitaker. She needed help and I helped her. I'll kill you, Whitaker hissed, lunging forward suddenly, pulling a knife from his boot. Sheriff Davis drew his revolver in one smooth motion. That's enough. Thomas Whitaker, you're spending the night in my jail. Threatening a man in front of the sheriff, have you lost your mind completely? Two bystanders from the saloon helped restrain Whitaker, who continued shouting threats and obscenities as the sheriff dragged him away. Lucas stood on the boardwalk, heart pounding, watching until they disappeared into the jailhouse. He hadn't expected things to escalate so quickly, but at least Eleanor was safe tonight. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Lucas untied Copper and headed back to the Carson Ranch, wondering what Eleanor planned to do now. Leaving a husband wasn't simple, especially in a small town like Agua Caliente. She would need support, protection, and a way to support herself. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten when Lucas returned to the ranch. He stabled Copper and made his way to the bunkhouse, hoping to get a few hours' sleep before the day began. To his surprise, he found Mr. Carson sitting on the porch of the main house, pipe in hand. Morning, Lucas, the rancher said. Sarah told me about our guest. How'd it go in town? Lucas removed his hat respectfully. Whitaker's in jail for the night, sir, drew a knife when confronted. Robert Carson shook his head. Never did like that man, too quick to anger, too fond of the bottle. He puffed on his pipe thoughtfully. Sarah says the young woman needs a safe place for a while. She's welcome to stay as long as necessary. That's mighty generous, Mr. Carson. Nothing generous about basic decency, son, Carson replied. Get some rest. We'll figure out next steps when everyone's had some sleep. Lucas nodded gratefully and headed for the bunkhouse. Despite his exhaustion, sleep proved elusive as his mind kept returning to Eleanor, her frightened eyes, her quiet dignity despite her circumstances, the gentle way she'd thanked him for helping her. He barely knew her, yet he felt responsible for her safety in a way that went beyond simple duty. When Lucas finally emerged from the bunkhouse a few hours later, he found Eleanor sitting on the main house porch with Sarah Carson. She wore a borrowed dress that was a bit too large for her slender frame, but she looked more at peace than she had the night before. Her bruises were starker in the daylight, but she'd washed her face and pinned her auburn hair back neatly. Good morning, Lucas said, approaching cautiously. How are you feeling, Miss Eleanor? Eleanor offered a small smile that transformed her face despite her injuries. Better, thank you. Mrs. Carson has been very kind. Call me Sarah, dear, I insist, the older woman said, patting Eleanor's hand. "Lucas, sit down and have some coffee." Eleanor's been telling me about her situation. Lucas accepted the offered cup gratefully. "I should tell you both Thomas Whitaker spent the night in jail. He pulled a knife when the sheriff confronted him." Eleanor paled. "Oh God, he'll be even angrier now." "He can be as angry as he likes behind bars," Sarah said firmly. "Robert and I have been talking. We think you should file for divorce, Eleanor." Eleanor's eyes widened. "Divorce? But that would ruin me. No one divorces in Agua Caliente." "Perhaps it's time someone did," Sarah replied. "Robert's brother is a lawyer in Tucson. He could help with the legal matters." Lucas watched emotions play across Eleanor's face: fear, hope, uncertainty. "What about the store?" he asked gently. "It was your father's, wasn't it?" Eleanor nodded sadly. "Yes, but Thomas owns it now. Everything I had went to him when we married. I have nothing, no money, no property, not even my own clothes." She gestured to the borrowed dress. "That's not entirely true," Sarah interjected. "Robert spoke with Judge Wilson this morning. Since you brought proof of abuse to the authorities, and given Thomas's violent behavior last night, there may be grounds to restore your property rights. It won't be easy, but it's possible." Hope flickered briefly in Eleanor's eyes before doubt extinguished it. "Even if that were true, I can't stay here. Thomas has friends in town. They wouldn't stand for it." "Then we'll find somewhere else," Lucas said suddenly. "Tucson, maybe, or even further. You could make a fresh start." Eleanor looked at him, surprised by his use of we. "Why would you do all this for a stranger?" Lucas met her gaze steadily. "Because no one did it for my mother when she needed it. Because it's the right thing to do." He paused, then added more quietly, "And because I don't think you're a stranger anymore, Miss Eleanor. Not really." A blush crept into Eleanor's cheeks, adding color to her pale face. Sarah Carson watched the exchange with a knowing smile before standing up. "I need to start on lunch," she announced. "Eleanor, why don't you show Lucas the garden while I work? The fresh air will do you good." Left alone with Lucas, Eleanor felt suddenly shy. They walked in silence towards Sarah's vegetable garden, the morning sun warm on their faces. "Did Thomas really pull a knife?" she finally asked. Lucas nodded grimly. "He did. The sheriff took him in, but he'll likely be released today." Eleanor hugged herself despite the warmth. "He won't stop, you know, not now that I've left. He'll see it as a betrayal." "You're not going back to him," Lucas said firmly. "We'll figure something out." "We barely know each other," Eleanor pointed out. "Why are you so invested in helping me?" Lucas stopped walking, turning to face her. "When I was 8 years old, I watched my father beat my mother unconscious because dinner wasn't ready when he came home. I was too small to stop him. By the time I was old enough to stand up to him, my mother was different, broken inside. We got away, but the damage was done." He took a deep breath. "When I heard you crying in that livery stable, saw what he'd done to you, I couldn't walk away." Eleanor reached out impulsively, touching his arm. "I'm so sorry about your mother." "It was a long time ago," Lucas said. "But some wounds don't fully heal. I don't want that for you, Eleanor. You deserve better." Eleanor felt tears threatening again, overwhelmed by this stranger's kindness. "I don't know what to do," she admitted. "I've never been on my own." "You're not on your own now," Lucas said simply. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. They turned to see Sheriff Davis riding toward the ranch house, his expression grim. Lucas instinctively moved closer to Eleanor, shielding her slightly with his body. "Morning, Northrop," Davis called as he dismounted. "Mrs. Whitaker?" He tipped his hat to Eleanor. "Sheriff," Lucas acknowledged. "What brings you out here? Thought you should know Thomas Whitaker's been released. Judge didn't see fit to hold him longer for a knife he didn't actually use." The sheriff looked apologetic. "He's making quite a stir in town, saying his wife's been kidnapped, making all sorts of accusations." Eleanor trembled slightly. "What kind of accusations?" "Nothing worth repeating, madam," Davis said kindly. "But I wanted to warn you both. He's drinking heavily and making threats." "I've done what I can legally, but a man has the right to reclaim his wife," Eleanor finished bitterly, "even if he beats her." Sheriff Davis had the grace to look uncomfortable. "The law has its limitations, Mrs. Whitaker, but for what it's worth, I believe you. And I'll do what I can to protect you within those limitations." "Thank you, Sheriff," Lucas said. "We appreciate the warning." After Davis departed, Eleanor turned to Lucas, real fear in her eyes. He'll come here, you know he will. Mr. Carson won't let him near you, Lucas assured her. Neither will I. And then what? Eleanor demanded, suddenly angry. We can't live like this forever, waiting for him to appear. I need to face him. End this properly. Lucas studied her with new respect. Despite her fear, there was a core of strength in Eleanor Bennett Whitaker that Thomas hadn't managed to break. Not alone, Lucas said. Whatever you decide to do, you won't face him alone. Over lunch, they discussed options with the Carsons. Robert Carson suggested filing official charges against Thomas, but Eleanor knew such cases rarely succeeded. What I want, she said slowly, is annulment, not divorce. We've been married less than a year. If I could prove he misrepresented himself, that he was violent and cruel from the beginning. That's actually a sound approach, Robert agreed. My brother could help with that, but you'd need to go to Tucson to file the papers. I'll take her, Lucas volunteered. We could leave tomorrow. Lucas, you don't have to, Eleanor began. I want to, he interrupted. Mr. Carson, I know I've only just returned from the drive, but take the time you need, Robert said firmly. This is more important than ranch work right now. Sarah reached over to pat Eleanor's hand. You're doing the right thing, dear. And perhaps, while in Tucson, you might consider what you want your future to look like. Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. A future it had been so long since she'd allowed herself to think beyond surviving the next day. Before her marriage, she'd dreamed of running the store, perhaps expanding it. She'd been good with numbers, with ordering, with customers. Maybe she could build something new. That evening, as Eleanor helped Sarah with dinner preparations, Lucas rode into town with Robert Carson to make arrangements for their journey. The general store was closed, its windows dark, but Lucas could see a light burning in the apartment above. Thomas Whitaker was home, probably drinking, possibly planning. Robert noticed Lucas's gaze. We'll be quick about our business here. No need to invite trouble. They purchased supplies for the journey to Tucson and arranged for 2 horses from the livery Lucas's own copper and a gentle mare named Daisy for Eleanor. As they were loading their purchases, a figure stumbled out of the saloon across the street. Northrop. Thomas Whitaker bellowed, weaving slightly as he walked. I know you took her. Where's my wife? Robert put a restraining hand on Lucas's arm. Don't engage, he murmured. Not worth it. Lucas nodded tightly, turning his back on Whitaker to secure their supplies. You think I don't see what's happening? Whitaker continued, his voice carrying across the street. You've wanted her since you first laid eyes on her. Well, she's mine, you hear me, mine. Lucas's jaw clenched, but he continued working, determined not to give Whitaker the satisfaction of her response. She'll come crawling back, Whitaker slurred. She's nothing without me. No money, no family, no skills except on her back. Before Robert could stop him, Lucas had crossed the street in long strides. He grabbed Whitaker by the shirt front, slamming him against the saloon wall. That's enough, Lucas growled, his face inches from Whitaker's. You speak about her that way again, and you'll regret it, Whitaker sneered, alcohol giving him false bravado. Truth hurts, doesn't it, Cowboy? What she promised you for your help, same thing she promised me. Lucas's fist connected with Whitaker's jaw before he could even process the decision to throw the punch. Whitaker crumpled, more from drunkenness than the force of the blow. Around them, saloon patrons had spilled onto the boardwalk, watching with interest. Lucas. Robert's sharp voice cut through the red haze of anger. That's enough. Let's go. Lucas stepped back, breathing hard. You stay away from her, he warned Whitaker, who was struggling to his feet. She deserves better than you. This isn't over, Whitaker slurred, blood trickling from his split lip, an ironic mirror of the injury he'd inflicted on Eleanor. Yes, it is, Lucas replied with quiet certainty. It ended the moment you raised your hand to her. They rode back to the ranch in tense silence. Finally, Robert spoke. I understand why you did that. Can't say I blame you, but fighting isn't the answer here. I know, Lucas admitted. Lost my temper, won't happen again. Robert chuckled unexpectedly. Don't make promises you can't keep, son. I've seen the way you look at Eleanor. This is personal for you now, isn't it? Lucas was grateful for the darkness that hid his flush. I just want to help her. Of course, Robert agreed, though his tone suggested he knew better. Just remember she's been through hell. Whatever feelings might be developing, she needs time. Space to figure out who she is without a man telling her what to do or who to be. Lucas nodded, knowing Robert was right. Eleanor needed a friend right now, not another man making claims on her. Still, he couldn't deny the pull he felt toward her, not just physical attraction, though she was certainly beautiful despite her bruises, but something deeper. A recognition, perhaps, of something kindred in their spirits. When they returned, Eleanor was sitting on the porch with Sarah, wrapped in a shawl against the evening chill. Her face brightened when she saw them, and Lucas felt an answering warmth spread through his chest. "Everything's arranged for tomorrow," Robert announced. "You'll leave at first light." "Thank you," Eleanor said sincerely. "Both of you, I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness." "Live a good life," Sarah replied simply. "That's repayment enough." Later, after everyone had retired for the night, Lucas sat alone on the bunkhouse steps watching the stars. The door to the main house opened, and Eleanor stepped out, still wrapped in her borrowed shawl. She spotted him and hesitated before walking toward the bunkhouse. "Couldn't sleep?" Lucas asked as she approached. Eleanor shook her head. "Too much thinking, may I?" She gestured to the step beside him. "Of course." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the night sounds of the desert surrounding them. "Sarah told me what happened in town," Eleanor finally said. "That you hit Thomas." Lucas winced. "Not my proudest moment." "He was saying things about you that no man should say about a woman." "Thank you for defending my honor," Eleanor said softly, "but please be careful. Thomas is dangerous when he's crossed." "I can handle myself," Lucas assured her. "That's what worries me," Eleanor admitted. "I don't want anyone else getting hurt because of me." Lucas turned to look at her. In the moonlight, her bruises seemed to fade, leaving only the delicate lines of her face, the curve of her lips, the determination in her eyes. "Eleanor," he said gently, "what happened to you isn't your fault." "None of it. You didn't ask for his cruelty. You don't deserve it, and you're not responsible for his actions or mine." A tear slipped down her cheek. "I keep thinking I should have seen it sooner. There were signs even before we married. The way he'd get so angry over small things, how he'd grip my arm too tightly sometimes. I ignored them because I was afraid of being alone, of losing the store, of disappointing my father's memory." Lucas resisted the urge to wipe away her tear. "We all make choices based on what we think is best at the time. The important thing is you're making different choices now." Eleanor smiled weakly. "I'm terrified," she confessed. "I've never traveled far from Agua Caliente, never been without family or a husband to make decisions." "You're stronger than you know," Lucas told her. "I saw it the moment you agreed to leave with me from that livery stable. That took courage, or desperation," Eleanor countered. "Sometimes they're the same thing," Lucas replied. "Get some sleep. We have a long ride ahead of us tomorrow." Eleanor nodded, rising to her feet. "Lucas, thank you, not just for helping me, but for believing I'm worth helping." Before he could respond, she had turned and was walking back to the house, her slender figure silhouetted against the starlit sky. Lucas watched her go, aware that something fundamental had shifted inside him. Whatever happened next, his life would never be quite the same. They set out for Tucson at dawn, Eleanor riding Daisy with surprising confidence. "My father taught me to ride when I was young," she explained when Lucas commented on it. "Before he got sick, we used to ride together on Sundays after church. The journey would take 3 days if they maintained a steady pace." Lucas had mapped out stopping points where they could find safe lodging. Eleanor wore a simple traveling dress borrowed from Sarah, with a wide-brimmed hat to protect her fair skin from the desert sun. The bruises on her face were fading slowly, turning from angry purple to sickly yellow-green. As they rode, Eleanor gradually opened up about her life before Thomas, her childhood in Agua Caliente, helping in her father's store, her dreams of perhaps one day becoming a teacher. Her father's illness had changed everything, leaving her with mounting debts and few options. "Thomas seemed like salvation," she admitted as they stopped to rest the horses near a small stream. "He offered to take over the store's debts to maintain my father's legacy. He was charming, attentive. When he proposed, it seemed like the answer to my prayers." She laughed bitterly. "Some answer." "How long after the wedding did things change?" Lucas asked gently. Eleanor trailed her fingers through the cool water. "A month, maybe 2. It started small criticism about the way I kept house, about how I spoke to customers. Then came the jealousy. He accused me of flirting with any man who spent too long in the store. He began drinking more heavily. The first time he hit me was 3 months after we married. I dropped a crate of canned goods and he slapped me across the face. Lucas felt his hands clench involuntarily. And no one in town noticed, said anything. Oh, people noticed, Eleanor said. They just didn't interfere. When I tried to tell Mrs. Holloway she runs the millinery shop, she told me I needed to be a better wife, that men sometimes needed a firm hand with spirited women. She shook her head. After that, I stopped trying to tell anyone. Lucas understood now why she'd been so surprised by his intervention. She'd learned the hard way that help wasn't coming. It won't be like that in Tucson, he promised. It's a bigger city, more opportunities for a woman on her own. And Robert's brother will help with the legal matters. Eleanor looked at him with curious eyes. What about you, Lucas? What happens after you deliver me safely to Tucson? It was a question Lucas had been asking himself. His life was with the Carson Ranch, the only real home he'd known since his mother died. Yet the thought of saying goodbye to Eleanor in Tucson felt wrong somehow. I haven't figured that part out yet, he admitted. But I'm not just going to drop you off and ride away, if that's what you're worried about. Eleanor smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. Good, because I've grown rather accustomed to having you around, Lucas Northrop. That night, they stayed at a small way station, a simple building with separate rooms for male and female travelers. The proprietor, Mrs. Jenkins, was a no-nonsense widow who sized them up with sharp eyes. Husband and wife, she asked as they signed the guest book. No, madam, Lucas replied honestly. Just traveling companions. Mrs. Jenkins raised an eyebrow but made no comment. She showed Eleanor to the women's dormitory and Lucas to the men's, serving them a hearty stew before retiring to her own quarters. As they ate at the common table, Eleanor leaned closer to Lucas. What if Thomas comes looking for us? He knows we're headed to Tucson. He'd have to sober up first, Lucas pointed out. And even then, we've got a good head start. Eleanor nodded, though she didn't look entirely convinced. Later, as they said goodnight in the hallway between their respective dormitories, she surprised Lucas by impulsively squeezing his hand. I'm glad you're with me, she whispered. I couldn't do this alone. Lucas felt the warmth of her hand long after she disappeared into the women's quarters. The second day of travel brought them deeper into desert country. The summer heat was oppressive by midday, forcing them to stop in what little shade they could find. Eleanor's fair skin, despite the hat and a borrowed shawl, was turning pink from the sun. We should rest until the worst heat passes, Lucas suggested, helping her down from Daisy. There's a stand of cottonwoods ahead where we can water the horses. The small grove provided blessed relief from the sun. They ate a simple lunch of bread, cheese, and dried fruit, washing it down with water from their canteens. Eleanor leaned back against a tree trunk, closing her eyes wearily. We still have a few hours before we can ride again, Lucas said. You should try to sleep. Eleanor opened one eye. What about you? I'll keep watch, he replied. Lucas, you need rest too. Thomas isn't going to materialize out of the desert. Humor me, Lucas said with a small smile. Sleep. I'll wake you when it's time to go. Eleanor didn't argue further, exhaustion winning out. She curled on her side, using her saddlebag as a pillow, and was asleep within minutes. Lucas watched her, the gentle rise and fall of her breathing, the way her auburn hair spilled across the ground. She looked peaceful in sleep, the worry lines around her eyes temporarily smoothed away. Lucas hadn't planned on becoming so invested in Eleanor's welfare. When he'd heard her crying in the livery that night, he'd acted on instinct, the same instinct that made him gentle with frightened horses and patient with newborn calves. But this feeling growing inside him was something else entirely, something both terrifying and exhilarating. A sound behind him snapped Lucas from his reverie. He turned sharply, hand going to the revolver at his hip, but it was only a jackrabbit darting through the underbrush. Still, the moment of tension reminded him of the very real danger they might be in. Thomas Whitaker had both motive and means to come after them, and Lucas wasn't naive enough to think the man would simply let Eleanor go. Eleanor stirred, murmuring something in her sleep. Her brow furrowed and she made a small distressed sound, a nightmare, Lucas realized. Gently, he reached out to touch her shoulder. "Eleanor," he said softly, "you're dreaming. You're safe." She woke with a start, eyes wild until they focused on Lucas's face. "I was back there," she whispered. "He found me and he was so angry, it was just a dream," Lucas assured her. "You're here with me, he can't hurt you now." Eleanor sat up, pushing her hair back from her face. "I keep wondering if I'm doing the right thing. What if the judge won't grant the annulment? What if I have to go back?" "You won't," Lucas said firmly. "Even if the annulment isn't granted, you have options. The Carsons would help you, I would help you." Eleanor studied his face. "Why, Lucas? Why are you really doing all this?" Lucas hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "At first, it was because it was the right thing to do, because I couldn't walk away knowing you were in danger." He paused. Now I think it's more than that." "More," Eleanor prompted, her voice barely audible. "I care what happens to you, Eleanor," Lucas admitted. "More than I probably should, given how little time we've known each other. I want you to be safe, yes, but I also want you to be happy, to have the life you deserve." Eleanor's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Lucas assured her quickly. "I'm not expecting anything from you. I just wanted you to know that you're not alone in this, not anymore." Eleanor reached out, hesitantly touching his cheek. "Thank you for being honest with me. Few men in my experience have been." The moment stretched between them, fragile and charged with unspoken possibilities. Then Eleanor lowered her hand and the moment passed. "I think the heat has lessened," she said, glancing at the sky. "We should probably continue our journey." Lucas nodded, getting to his feet and offering her his hand. As they prepared the horses to ride again, he caught her watching him with a thoughtful expression that made his heart beat a little faster. They made good progress through the afternoon and into the early evening, stopping at another small way station as darkness fell. This one was more primitive than the previous nights, lodging just a rough cabin run by an elderly couple who offered them a simple meal and separate pallets in the common room. The old woman, Mrs. Tanner, clicked her tongue sympathetically when she saw Eleanor's fading bruises. "Got away from a bad one, did you, child?" she asked as she served them bowls of beans and cornbread. Eleanor tensed but nodded. "Yes, madam. Good for you," Mrs. Tanner said firmly. "My sister stayed with her brute of a husband till he killed her. Wish she'd had the sense to run when she could." Her husband grunted agreement from his place by the fire. "Man who raises his hand to a woman ain't worth the dirt he stands on." Lucas saw Eleanor's shoulders relax slightly at their acceptance. It was a stark contrast to the judgment she'd faced in Agua Caliente. "We're headed to Tucson," Eleanor explained. "I'm filing for annulment." Mrs. Tanner nodded approvingly. "Tucson's a good place for a fresh start, plenty of opportunities for a young woman with sense, which you clearly have." Later, as they settled onto their pallets on opposite sides of the common room, the old couple having retired to their small bedroom, Eleanor whispered across the darkness to Lucas. "Do you think it's true what Mrs. Tanner said, about Tucson being a good place for a fresh start?" "I do," Lucas replied softly. "It's growing fast. They need teachers, shopkeepers, all sorts of people." "I've been thinking about what I might do," Eleanor confessed. "I was good at running the store with my father. Perhaps I could find work in a shop while I save money to start something of my own." Lucas smiled at the hope in her voice. "I think you could do anything you set your mind to, Eleanor." She was quiet for a moment. "What about you, Lucas? What do you want from life?" It was a question Lucas hadn't considered deeply in years. After his mother died, he drifted from ranch to ranch until finding a home with the Carsons. He'd been content with his life as a cowboy, saving his wages, occasionally thinking vaguely about buying a small spread of his own someday. "I suppose I've always thought I might have my own ranch eventually," he said. "Nothing grand, just enough land to run some cattle, maybe breed horses, a place to call my own." "That sounds nice," Eleanor said softly. "A home." "Yes," Lucas agreed, suddenly able to picture it more clearly than ever before. A modest house, a barn, horses in the corral. And, unbidden, the image of Eleanor there with him, her auburn hair catching the sunset light as she called him in for supper. He pushed the thought away. "We should get some sleep. One more day to Tucson. "Good night, Lucas," Eleanor whispered. "Good night, Eleanor." The final day of their journey dawned clear and cooler, a welcome relief after the previous day's heat. They made good time, both eager to reach their destination. By late afternoon, they could see Tucson in the distance, a sprawling settlement in the desert valley. "It's larger than I expected," Eleanor remarked as they approached the outskirts of the city. Lucas nodded. "Growing every day from what I hear. The railroad's coming through soon, which will change things even more." Eleanor adjusted her hat nervously. "Do you think Mr. Carson's brother will help us? What if he's not there?" "Robert sent a telegram before we left. He's expecting us," Lucas assured her. "His name is James Carson, and he has a law office on Congress Street." As they rode into Tucson, Eleanor looked around with wide eyes, taking in the mix of adobe buildings and newer wooden structures, the bustling streets filled with wagons, riders, and pedestrians. It was by no means a large city by Eastern standards, but compared to Agua Caliente, it was a metropolis. They found James Carson's law office without difficulty. He was a slighter, more scholarly version of his brother, with the same kind eyes but a more reserved manner. He welcomed them warmly, however, ushering them into his office and sending his clerk to arrange lodging for them at a nearby boarding house. "Robert explained the situation in his telegram," James said once they were seated. "Mrs. Whitaker, I want you to know that I believe annulments are entirely possible in cases of fraud or cruelty. If your husband misrepresented himself before marriage or has been abusive, we have grounds." Eleanor twisted her hands in her lap. "He did both, but will a judge believe me?" "Those bruises, though fading, help your case," James said frankly. "As will witness testimony. Did anyone in Agua Caliente see the abuse?" Eleanor shook her head sadly. "Not directly, I hid it well, but Lucas saw the aftermath, as did the Carsons." James made some notes. "And Sheriff Davis is aware of the situation." "Good, his statement will carry weight." He looked up. "I won't mislead you, Mrs. Whitaker. This won't be easy or quick, but I believe we have a strong case for annulment which would restore your maiden name and potentially your property rights as well." "How long?" Eleanor asked. "Several weeks at minimum. The court must notify your husband, who has the right to respond. Then a hearing will be scheduled." James's expression softened. "In the meantime, I suggest you begin building your new life here. Find employment, establish yourself in the community." Eleanor nodded, determination replacing the uncertainty in her eyes. "I can do that." "Excellent. Now, let's discuss the particulars of your marriage and the evidence we'll present." The meeting lasted over an hour. When they finally emerged from the law office, the sun was setting, painting the desert city in hues of gold and pink. Lucas's clerk had arranged rooms for them at a respectable boarding house run by a Mrs. Abernathy, a widow who kept a strict but fair establishment. As they walked their horses through the streets, Eleanor looked more hopeful than Lucas had seen her since they'd met. "It might actually happen," she said wonderingly. "I might actually be free of him." "You will be," Lucas assured her. "James Carson knows his business." They reached the boarding house, a 2-story adobe structure with a small courtyard. Mrs. Abernathy greeted them at the door, a tall, austere woman with silver-streaked black hair. "Mr. Carson explained your situation," she told Eleanor. "I don't tolerate any nonsense in my establishment, but I also believe women deserve better than to be used as punching bags. You'll be safe here." "Thank you," Eleanor said sincerely. "You'll have the room at the back of the second floor," Mrs. Abernathy continued. "Mr. Northrop, you'll be in the men's quarters across the courtyard. Meals are at 7, noon, and 6. No gentlemen visitors in ladies' rooms and no ladies in the men's quarters. Clear?" "Yes, madam," they both replied, somewhat amused by her directness. After stabling their horses and retrieving their few belongings, Mrs. Abernathy showed them to their respective rooms. Lucas's was small but clean, with a narrow bed, washstand, and chest of drawers. He could only assume Eleanor's was similar. They agreed to meet for the evening meal, giving them both time to wash away the dust of travel. When Eleanor appeared in the dining room, Lucas was struck by the transformation. She'd washed her hair and changed into her cleanest dress, and though the bruises were still visible, there was a lightness to her that hadn't been there before. "You look refreshed," he commented as she took the seat across from him. I feel refreshed, she admitted. For the first time in months, I feel like I can breathe. Mrs. Abernathy served a hearty meal of stew, fresh bread, and stewed apples, which they ate with good appetite. The only other boarders present were an elderly schoolteacher and a young bank clerk, neither of whom showed much interest in the newcomers. After dinner, Lucas and Eleanor stepped into the courtyard, enjoying the cool evening air. The desert stars were emerging, brilliant against the deepening blue of the sky. "What happens now?" Eleanor asked quietly. Lucas leaned against the adobe wall. "James will file your petition tomorrow. You heard him, it will take time. In the meantime, you should look for work, as he suggested." Eleanor nodded. "And you, will you return to the Carson ranch now?" The question hung between them. Lucas had been considering this since their arrival. His duty, as he'd originally conceived it, was fulfilled. Eleanor was safe in Tucson, with legal help and a secure place to stay. Yet the thought of leaving her felt wrong. "I thought I might stay a while," he said carefully. "Make sure everything goes smoothly with the petition. Find work here temporarily." Relief crossed Eleanor's face before she could hide it. "I'd like that," she admitted. "The thought of facing all this alone is daunting." "Then it's settled," Lucas said. "I'll send word to Mr. Carson tomorrow that I'll be extending my stay in Tucson." Eleanor smiled, her face softening in the starlight. "Thank you, Lucas, for everything." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the night sounds of the city-distant piano music from a saloon, the occasional shout or laugh, the clop of horses' hooves on the street beyond the courtyard wall. "It's strange," Eleanor mused. "A week ago, I thought my life was set. Miserable but set. Now everything has changed." "For the better, I hope," Lucas said. Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "Definitely for the better." The next morning, they parted ways temporarily. Eleanor to accompany James Carson to file her petition, Lucas to send a telegram to Robert Carson and look for work. They agreed to meet for the midday meal at the boarding house. Lucas found temporary employment quickly. Tucson was growing, and skilled ranch hands were in demand. A livery stable owner named Martinez hired him on the spot when Lucas demonstrated his way with horses, offering fair wages for help with breaking and training new stock. "Not permanent," Lucas explained when he told Eleanor over lunch. "But it will do while we're here." Eleanor's morning had been equally productive. "The petition is filed," she announced with quiet pride. "And Mr. Carson introduced me to Mrs. Reynolds, who owns a dry goods store on Mayor Street. She needs help with inventory and accounts. I start tomorrow." "That's wonderful," Lucas said, genuinely pleased for her. "It sounds perfect for your experience." "It's not ownership," Eleanor acknowledged, "but it's a start, and the wages are fair." Over the next 2 weeks, they fell into a comfortable routine. Each morning, they breakfasted together before going to their respective jobs. In the evenings, they often walked through Tucson, exploring their new surroundings and talking about their days. Eleanor flourished at the dry goods store. Mrs. Reynolds was impressed with her knowledge of merchandise and bookkeeping, quickly giving her more responsibility. The fading bruises on her face occasionally drew curious looks from customers, but in the diverse frontier city, people were less inclined to pry than in small Agua Caliente. Lucas enjoyed his work at the livery, though he knew it was temporary. Martinez was a fair employer who appreciated Lucas's gentle but firm way with difficult horses. The days passed quickly, filled with physical labor that left little time for worry. But worry came nonetheless, usually in the quiet moments before sleep. Thomas Whitaker had been officially notified of Eleanor's petition for annulment. So far, there had been no response, but Lucas doubted a man so possessive would simply let his wife go without a fight. His concerns proved well-founded 3 weeks after their arrival in Tucson. Lucas was returning to the boarding house after work when he spotted a familiar figure leaning against the wall opposite the entrance. Thomas Whitaker, sober and watchful, his eyes fixed on the boarding house door. Lucas approached cautiously, his hand instinctively moving closer to his sidearm. "Whitaker," he acknowledged coldly, "didn't expect to see you in Tucson." Whitaker's eyes narrowed. "Northrop, still playing protector to my wife, I see." "She doesn't need protecting from me," Lucas replied evenly. "What do you want?" "What's rightfully mine," Whitaker said, Eleanor is my wife, the store is my business. I'm not letting either go without a fight. Lucas stepped closer, keeping his voice low. She has bruises that haven't fully healed yet from the last time you fought for what you claim is yours. You go near her again, you'll answer to me. A cold smile spread across Whitaker's face. Big talk from a saddled tramp. You think she actually cares for you? Eleanor's a practical woman. She married me for security, for the store. Once she realizes this little rebellion will cost her everything, she'll come home. You don't know her at all, Lucas said, contempt evident in his voice. She'd rather have nothing than spend another day with you. Whitaker's smile vanished. We'll see about that. I've filed a response to her petition. The hearing is next week. Tell her I'll be there and I'll be bringing witnesses from Agua Caliente who will testify to her unstable behavior. Lucas felt a chill at the implied threat. What are you talking about? Let's just say several upstanding citizens are prepared to swear that Eleanor has been acting erratically for months, that she's been seen talking to herself, making wild accusations, that her father's death left her unbalanced. Whitaker smirked. Who do you think a judge will believe? Me, a respected business owner, or a woman whose own neighbors think she's lost her mind? Lucas stepped forward, fury coursing through him, but Whitaker held up a hand. Careful, cowboy. Assault me, and you'll just prove my point about the bad influences in my poor wife's life. With effort, Lucas restrained himself. You won't get away with this, Whitaker. I already have, Whitaker replied confidently. See you at the hearing. He tipped his hat mockingly and walked away, leaving Lucas seething on the sidewalk. Inside the boarding house, Eleanor was waiting anxiously, having spotted Thomas from her window. Was that him? What did he say? She demanded as soon as Lucas entered. Lucas hesitated, not wanting to worry her further, but knowing she needed to be prepared. He's filed a response to your petition. The hearing is next week. Eleanor paled, and he's planning to contest it, Lucas admitted. He claims to have witnesses who will testify that you're not in your right mind. What? Eleanor gasped, sinking into a chair. That's absurd. Who would say such a thing? He didn't name names, Lucas said. But we need to tell James Carson immediately. He needs to be prepared for this line of attack. They went to the lawyer's office first thing the next morning. James Carson listened to their account with growing concern. Character assassination is a common tactic in these cases, he acknowledged. But we can counter it. Mrs. Whitaker will need character witnesses of our own people who can testify to your sound mind and your husband's abusive behavior. The Carsons, Lucas suggested. Sheriff Davis, perhaps. And we should request a medical examination, James added. A doctor can testify to the physical evidence of abuse, which is much harder to dismiss than character testimony. Eleanor twisted her hands nervously. Will it be enough? Thomas can be very convincing when he wants to be. Truth has a way of prevailing, James assured her, though Lucas thought he detected a note of uncertainty in the lawyer's voice. In the meantime, both of you should be cautious. Mr. Whitaker has shown he's willing to go to extreme lengths to maintain control. As they left the office, Eleanor was unnaturally quiet. They walked several blocks before she spoke. I knew he would fight, she said softly. But to try to make people believe I'm insane, who would do such a thing? Lucas took her hand, squeezing it gently. Someone desperate. Someone who knows he's losing. It won't work, Eleanor. She looked up at him, vulnerability and determination warring in her eyes. Promise me something, Lucas. If things go wrong, if somehow he wins, he won't, Lucas interrupted firmly. But if he does, Eleanor insisted, promise me you won't let him take me back to Agua Caliente. I'd rather run forever than go back to that life. Lucas stopped walking, turning to face her fully. I promise, Eleanor, no matter what happens in that courtroom, you will never have to go back to him. Relief washed over her face. She stood on tiptoe and, to Lucas's surprise, pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. Thank you, she whispered. The week before the hearing passed in a blur of preparation. James Carson built their case meticulously, gathering statements from the Carsons and Sheriff Davis, arranging for a local doctor to examine Eleanor and document her healing injuries. Eleanor continued working at the dry goods store, finding solace in the routine and earning misses. Reynolds' unqualified support. That woman has more sense and capability in her little finger than most have in their whole being. Mrs. Reynolds told James Carson when he asked for her impressions of Eleanor. If she's unbalanced, then the rest of us are stark raving mad. Lucas watched over Eleanor carefully, alert for any sign of Thomas Whitaker, but the man seemed to be biding his time, waiting for the hearing. Lucas found himself growing increasingly protective, walking Eleanor to and from work, staying close whenever they were in public. The night before the hearing, neither could sleep. They sat together in the boarding house courtyard long after the other residents had retired, talking in low voices. "Are you afraid?" Lucas asked as the midnight hour approached. Eleanor considered the question seriously. "Yes," she admitted. "But not the way I was afraid of Thomas. That was a different kind of fear, constant, crushing, like being slowly suffocated." She looked up at the star-filled sky. "This fear is, cleaner somehow, fear of the unknown, of change, but also mixed with hope." Lucas nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "Whatever happens tomorrow, you've already won, Eleanor. You found the courage to leave, to start over. That's no small thing." Eleanor smiled at him, her face softened by moonlight. "I couldn't have done it without you, Lucas. You gave me the push I needed, the belief that I deserved better." "You always deserved better," Lucas said quietly. "I just reminded you of what you already knew." They fell silent, the night sounds of the desert city wrapping around them. Lucas was acutely aware of Eleanor beside him, of the subtle lavender scent of the soap she used, of how naturally her hand had found its way into his. "Lucas," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, "if the annulment is granted, what will you do then? Return to the Carson ranch?" It was a question he'd been asking himself with increasing frequency. His job at the Livery was temporary by design, and his true place was back at the ranch. Yet the thought of leaving Eleanor, even after her legal battles were won, left an emptiness in his chest he couldn't ignore. "I don't know," he answered honestly. "What about you? Will you stay in Tucson?" Eleanor nodded. "I think so. I'm establishing myself here. Mrs. Reynolds has hinted she might consider me for a manager position eventually, and I've come to care for this place, for the life I'm building." For the people, Lucas wondered, or had he imagined the meaningful glance she'd cast his way? "We should try to sleep," Eleanor said, rising from the bench they shared. "Tomorrow will be demanding enough without exhaustion added to it." Lucas stood as well, still holding her hand. On impulse, he raised it to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Whatever happens tomorrow, Eleanor, I'm proud to know you." Color flooded her cheeks, visible even in the moonlight. "Good night, Lucas," she whispered, before turning and hurrying into the house. Lucas remained in the courtyard for a long time after she'd gone, his thoughts a complicated tangle of duty, desire, and an emotion he was only beginning to recognize as love. The courthouse was imposing, a territorial-style building of red brick with white trim. Eleanor wore her best dress, her hair neatly pinned, her expression composed despite the anxiety Lucas knew she felt. James Carson met them at the entrance, his manner reassuringly confident. "Remember," he told Eleanor, "speak clearly, tell the truth, and don't let Whitaker or his lawyer provoke you. The judge will be watching your demeanor as much as listening to your words." Eleanor nodded, squaring her shoulders. "I'm ready." Inside, the courtroom was already half full. Thomas Whitaker sat at the front with a slick-looking lawyer Lucas didn't recognize. Behind them were several people from Agua Caliente, including Mrs. Holloway from the millinery shop and 2 men from the town council. Eleanor faltered slightly at the sight of them. "I didn't think they would actually come," she murmured to Lucas. "They can only speak to what they've seen or heard," James reminded her, "not to the truth of what happened behind closed doors." They took their seats on the opposite side of the aisle. The proceedings began formally, with the judge, a stern-faced man named Harrington, outlining the nature of the case, and the burden of proof required for an annulment. James presented their case first, methodically outlining the evidence of Thomas's cruelty and deception. Eleanor testified with quiet dignity about the escalating abuse, the isolation, the fear she had lived with. The doctor confirmed her injuries were consistent with her account. Robert Carson, who had traveled to Tucson for the hearing, spoke of her condition when she arrived at the ranch and of Thomas's violent behavior in town. Lucas's testimony came last. He described finding Eleanor in the livery stable, bruised and terrified, and Thomas's later threats and attack with a knife. Under questioning from James, he emphasized Eleanor's courage and sound judgment throughout their journey and subsequent weeks in Tucson. Thomas's lawyer, a man named Buchanan, cross-examined each witness aggressively, trying to poke holes in their testimony. When it was Lucas's turn, Buchanan approached with a predatory smile. "Mr. Northrop, you've spent considerable time alone with Mrs. Whitaker since helping her leave her husband, have you not?" Lucas met his gaze steadily. "We traveled together to Tucson and have both been staying at Mrs. Abernathy's boarding house, yes. And would you say you've developed feelings for Mrs. Whitaker during this time?" James Carson stood. "Objection, Your Honor. Mr. Northrop's feelings are irrelevant to the facts of the case." "On the contrary," Buchanan countered, "if Mr. Northrop has romantic designs on the petitioner, it speaks to his motivation for involvement and the credibility of his testimony." Judge Harrington considered briefly. "I'll allow it. The witness will answer." Lucas took a deep breath, aware of Eleanor's gaze on him. "I have developed great respect and admiration for Mrs. Whitaker's courage and character," he said carefully. "Any man would be fortunate to earn her regard. But my involvement in this matter stems from witnessing abuse and offering help to someone in need, not from romantic interest." It wasn't entirely true, and from Eleanor's slight smile, she knew it, but it was the answer the court needed to hear. When Thomas Whitaker took the stand, he presented himself as a concerned, loving husband whose young wife had become increasingly unstable after her father's death. He claimed her accusations of abuse were delusions, her injuries the result of falls or self-harm during hysterical episodes. "I only want what's best for Eleanor," he said, his voice dripping with false concern. "She needs care and guidance, not this misguided independence that has led her into the company of strangers." He cast a meaningful look at Lucas. His witnesses supported his narrative. Mrs. Holloway testified she had observed Eleanor talking to herself in the store, seeming disoriented and emotional. The town councilmen spoke of Thomas's good standing in the community and their concerns about Eleanor's fragile state since her father's death. By the time Buchanan rested their case, Lucas could see doubt on Judge Harrington's face. Eleanor sat rigid beside him, her knuckles white where she gripped her handkerchief. James Carson requested a brief recess before closing arguments, which the judge granted. In a small antechamber, James paced while Eleanor sat motionless, her face pale. "They're lying," she whispered. "All of them. Why would they do this?" "Because Whitaker has influence in Agua Caliente," Robert Carson said grimly. "And because it's easier to believe a woman is hysterical than to admit a respected businessman is a monster behind closed doors." "We need something more," James said, stopping his pacing. "Something concrete that proves Whitaker is lying." Lucas had been silent, thinking hard about everything he'd heard. Mrs. Holloway claimed she saw Eleanor talking to herself, acting strangely 3 months ago in May. Eleanor nodded. "Yes, that's what she said. But that's when Thomas first hit you, isn't it?" "You told me it was 3 months after your wedding, which would have been in February." "Yes," Eleanor confirmed, realization dawning. "The day I dropped the canned goods. I remember because it was the day after Mrs. Holloway ordered that special hat trim from back east. She came in specifically to check if it had arrived. And did you seem upset that day? Might she have mistaken your distress after being struck for instability?" Eleanor's eyes widened. "I was crying when she came in. Thomas had just left for the saloon. My lip was bleeding. I told her I'd bitten it when I fell." James and Robert exchanged glances. If Mrs. Holloway actually saw evidence of abuse but chose to interpret it as instability, that undermines their entire case, James said. "We need to recall her for questioning." When court resumed, James requested permission to recall Mrs. Holloway, which Judge Harrington granted with visible reluctance. The milliner took the stand again, her prim exterior showing signs of strain. "Mrs. Holloway," James began, "you testified earlier that you observed Mrs. Whitaker talking to herself and seeming disoriented approximately 3 months ago. Is that correct?" "Yes, that's right," Mrs. Holloway replied. Was that the same day you visited the store to inquire about a special order of hat trim from back east, Mrs.? Holloway blinked, surprised by the specific question. Yes, I believe it was. How did you know that? Mrs. Whitaker remembers the occasion clearly, James said. Did you notice anything unusual about her appearance that day? Any injuries, perhaps? Mrs. Holloway shifted uncomfortably. She had a cut on her lip. She said she'd fallen. Did you believe her? Objection, Buchanan called. Calls for speculation. Your Honor, the witness has already speculated extensively about Mrs. Whitaker's mental state, James countered. I'm simply asking about her observations and conclusions. I'll allow it, Judge Harrington ruled. The witness will answer. Mrs. Holloway looked trapped. I thought perhaps there might be more to it. Mr. Whitaker had been in the millinery earlier, quite upset about something. But it wasn't my place to pry. Not your place to pry, James repeated. So instead of asking if Mrs. Whitaker needed help, you chose to interpret her distress as mental instability, and you're now using that interpretation to help the very man you suspected might have harmed her, Mrs. Holloway's face crumpled. You don't understand. In a small town like Agua Caliente, you don't cross a man like Thomas Whitaker. He can ruin your business, your reputation. So you'd rather ruin a young woman's life, James pressed. Let her return to a man you suspected was abusing her. Objection, Buchanan shouted. Badgering the witness, withdrawn, James said smoothly, having made his point. No further questions. The atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted perceptibly. The other witnesses from Agua Caliente looked uncomfortable, and Thomas Whitaker was rigid with barely contained fury. In his closing argument, James Carson hammered home the significance of Mrs. Holloway's admission. Your Honor, we have heard testimony not just of abuse, but of a concerted effort to discredit a victim rather than hold her abuser accountable. The petitioner doesn't seek revenge or financial gain. She seeks only freedom from a man who has betrayed the most fundamental trust of marriage by responding to vulnerability with violence. Buchanan's closing was less effective, his earlier confidence diminished by Mrs. Holloway's damaging testimony. He emphasized the sanctity of marriage and the importance of not dissolving such bonds lightly, but his arguments rang hollow after the morning's revelations. Judge Harrington called a recess to consider his decision. The wait was agonizing. Eleanor sat between Lucas and Robert Carson, her face composed but her hands trembling slightly. Whatever happens, Lucas told her quietly, remember what I promised. You won't go back to him. Eleanor nodded, drawing strength from his certainty. When court reconvened 2 hours later, Judge Harrington's expression gave nothing away as he took his seat. Having considered the evidence and testimony presented, I am prepared to render my decision, he began formally. Petitions for annulment require clear and convincing evidence of fraud or cruelty that would have prevented a valid marriage contract had the facts been known. In this case, the petitioner alleges that the respondent concealed a violent nature and subsequently engaged in physical abuse. He paused, reviewing his notes. The evidence of physical injury is undisputed, though the cause has been contested. The testimonies presented offer two vastly different narratives, one of a troubled young woman experiencing delusions, another of a calculated campaign of abuse and control. The courtroom was utterly silent, every person present holding their breath. What tips the scales, in my assessment, is not just the medical evidence which supports the petitioner's claims, but the revealing testimony of Mrs. Holloway, which suggests a pattern of community intimidation that lends credibility to the petitioner's account. Judge Harrington looked directly at Thomas Whitaker. Mr. Whitaker, I find the petitioner's allegations of cruelty and misrepresentation to be proven to the standard required by law. The marriage is hereby annulled and declared void from its inception. Eleanor made a small sound, somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Lucas reached for her hand, squeezing it tightly. Further, the judge continued, as this marriage is deemed void ab initio, all property that passed to Mr. Whitaker solely by virtue of the marriage contract is to be returned to Miss Bennett. He used Eleanor's maiden name deliberately. This includes the general store in Agua Caliente, which evidence shows was her father's property prior to the marriage. Thomas Whitaker leapt to his feet. "This is outrageous. That store is mine. I paid its debts. Sit down, Mr. Whitaker," Judge Harrington ordered sharply. "The debts you paid were consideration for a contract that has been voided due to your own actions. You are fortunate I am not referring this matter for criminal prosecution based on the evidence of abuse presented here today." Thomas subsided, his face mottled with rage. His lawyer whispered urgently in his ear, restraining him from further outburst. "Miss Bennett," the judge continued more gently, "you are free to resume your maiden name and your independent life. The court extends its best wishes for your future." With a final bang of his gavel, he declared, "This matter is closed." The courtroom erupted in murmurs and movement. James Carson shook Eleanor's hand, then Lucas's, his face wreathed in satisfaction. "Congratulations, Miss Bennett, a comprehensive victory." Eleanor seemed dazed, the reality of the judgment not yet fully registered. "I'm free," she whispered, "truly free." "And the store is yours again," Robert Carson reminded her. "Your father's legacy is back in your hands." This realization brought fresh tears to Eleanor's eyes. "I never thought. I had resigned myself to losing it forever." They made their way out of the courtroom, Eleanor accepting congratulations from Mrs. Reynolds and other Tucson acquaintances who had come to support her. Lucas kept a watchful eye for Thomas Whitaker, but the man had disappeared, his humiliation apparently driving him to a hasty retreat. That evening, a small celebration was held at James Carson's home. Eleanor was the center of attention, radiant with newfound freedom and possibility. Lucas watched her from across the room, her smile more genuine than he had ever seen it, her laughter unguarded for the first time. "You've done a good thing here, son," Robert Carson said, joining Lucas by the window. "Given a young woman back her life." "She did that herself," Lucas replied. "She found the courage to leave, to fight for her freedom. I just helped a little along the way." Robert studied him shrewdly. "And now, what are your plans, Lucas? Will you be returning to the ranch with me tomorrow?" It was the question Lucas had been avoiding, the decision he'd been postponing. "I'm not sure, sir. I've been thinking." "About staying in Tucson," Robert supplied with a knowing smile, "or more specifically about staying near a certain newly free young woman." Lucas felt heat rise in his face. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to anyone with eyes," Robert chuckled. "But I understand. Some things are more important than ranch work." He clapped Lucas on the shoulder. "Whatever you decide, there's always a place for you at the Carson Ranch. Take the time you need to figure things out." Across the room, Eleanor caught Lucas's eye and smiled, a private smile meant just for him. In that moment, his decision crystallized. He would stay not just for now, but for as long as she wanted him near. Later, as the gathering dispersed, Lucas and Eleanor walked back to the boarding house together under a canopy of stars. The night was cool, the streets of Tucson quieter than usual. "I still can't quite believe it," Eleanor said, her arm linked through his. "Everything happened so fast, finding you, coming to Tucson, the hearing. It feels like a dream." "A good one, I hope," Lucas replied. Eleanor stopped walking, turning to face him. "The best kind, Lucas. I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done." "You don't need to thank me," he said softly. "Seeing you free, happy, that's all the thanks I need." Eleanor studied his face in the moonlight. "Robert told me you're considering staying in Tucson." "I am," Lucas admitted, "though I haven't decided for certain yet." "What would help you decide?" Eleanor asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucas took a deep breath. "Knowing if there might be something here for me, something beyond friendship." Eleanor's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "When you found me in that livery stable, I was at my lowest point. I had given up hoping for anything better. You didn't just help me escape, Thomas, you helped me remember who I was, who I could be." She reached up to touch his cheek gently. "If that isn't the beginning of something beyond friendship, I don't know what is." Lucas covered her hand with his own. "I don't want to rush you, Eleanor. You've just gained your freedom. You might want to enjoy that independence for a while." "I thought the same thing," Eleanor admitted, "that I should stand on my own, prove to myself that I could. But then I realized choosing to be with someone because you want to, not because you need to or have to, is a kind of freedom too." She smiled up at him. I choose you, Lucas Northrop, if you'll have me." Lucas felt his heart expand with joy and wonder. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his head and kissed her a gentle, tender kiss that held all the promise of their newfound beginning. When they finally broke apart, Eleanor's eyes were shining. "Stay in Tucson," she whispered. "Help me build something new. Something that belongs to both of us." "I'd like that," Lucas replied, his voice rough with emotion. "Very much." They continued their walk to the boarding house, making plans, dreaming aloud. Lucas would continue working at the livery for now, saving money. Eleanor would manage the sale of the store in Agua Caliente through James Carson, using the proceeds to open a new business in Tucson, perhaps a bookshop, something she had always dreamed of, but Thomas had dismissed as impractical. "We'll take our time," Lucas said as they reached the boarding house. "Do things properly." Eleanor smiled mischievously. "Not too much time, I hope. I've wasted enough of that already." 2 months later, on a crisp autumn day, Eleanor Bennett and Lucas Northrop were married in a simple ceremony in the Tucson chapel. Sarah and Robert Carson stood as witnesses, their faces beaming with approval. Eleanor wore a new dress of pale blue, her auburn hair adorned with desert wildflowers. Lucas could hardly believe his good fortune as he watched her walk toward him, her eyes filled with the same love that overflowed from his heart. Their life together unfolded with the natural rhythm of seasons. Eleanor's bookshop, Bennett's Books and Curiosities, opened the following spring, quickly becoming a Tucson institution. Lucas purchased a small property on the outskirts of town, where he began breeding and training horses, his natural affinity for the animals earning him a solid reputation among ranchers and cavalry officers alike. Thomas Whitaker left Agua Caliente after selling the store to James Carson on Eleanor's behalf. Rumor had it he headed for California, his reputation tarnished, his influence diminished. Eleanor occasionally thought of him with a mixture of pity and relief, grateful for her escape and the new life she had found. 5 years after their wedding, Lucas and Eleanor welcomed their first child, a son they named James, after the lawyer who had helped secure Eleanor's freedom. 2 years later, a daughter joined their family, named Sarah for the kind woman who had taken in a bruised and frightened Eleanor on that fateful night. On the 10th anniversary of the night Lucas had found Eleanor crying in the livery stable, they sat together on the porch of their ranch house, watching their children play in the yard as the desert sunset painted the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. "Do you ever think about how different our lives might have been if you hadn't heard me that night?" Eleanor asked, her head resting comfortably on Lucas's shoulder. "Sometimes," Lucas admitted. "But then I remember what my mother used to say, that some souls are meant to find each other, no matter what obstacles stand in their way." Eleanor smiled, turning to meet her husband's gaze. "I like that idea, that we would have found each other somehow, even without that terrible night." "I believe we would have," Lucas said, drawing her close. "But I'm grateful we didn't have to wait any longer than we did." As darkness fell over their little piece of desert paradise, Eleanor Bennett, Northrop silently thanked the frightened young woman who had found the courage to run, the cowboy who had stopped to help her, and the twist of fate that had brought them together. From the deepest darkness had come the greatest light, proving that even in the wild uncertainty of the frontier, love could not only survive but flourish, bringing healing and joy where once there had been only pain.